Hey everybody, welcome back to Cardboard and Beyond. It's Bryce. A quick note before today's show. I just want you to know what you can expect from me as a podcast host. In general, quality is much more important to us than quantity, so we're not going to adhere to a rigid release structure. Instead, we want to make sure that a show is good and ready for you before we release it, and that we've given adequate time to research our subjects because our subjects are so important to us. With that housekeeping out of the way, on to our show with Joshua Scott. Enjoy.
All right, so
Josh just had an aneurysm on screen.
Right, so you have what is it? You have four pieces that start in the arena.
Oh,
And
let's
you
make them
need
items so that you can steal them with meeps.
Oh god.
It's a lovely summer evening here in Los Angeles, California, and a cloudy winter afternoon in New Zealand. That's relevant because my guest today is Joshua Scott, Rules and Policy Manager for Legend Story Studios. In layman's terms, he is the head of the judiciary for the game of Flesh and Blood. It's not a job one typically goes to school for, so instead of muck about with all that, Josh instead got his foot in the door by flapping the notoriously unflappable Mr. James White. We'll dig deeper into that and much more in this episode because Josh has got the record for the longest Fab podcast appearance. Joshua, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Josh, first and foremost, do you prefer to be called Josh or Joshua?
Honestly, I don't mind as long as I know you're talking to me.
Okay, amazing. So I'm going to fluctuate between the two the entirety of the show, if that's all right with you.
Yep, perfectly fine.
Well, first and foremost, Josh, we like to create a three-dimensional human out of everybody that comes onto the show. So we're going to start this first act with, who is Joshua Scott? A question that I'm sure you ask yourself every single day, as we all do. First and foremost, why card games, Josh? Why the obsession?
I hesitate to call it an obsession, although it has sort of become an obsession. It wasn't an obsession at first. It was more of a curiosity. I never really adhered to card games early on in my life. I obviously played a little bit of Yu-Gi-Oh, a little bit of Pokemon when I was a kid. You collect a few cards from your older brother, you bring them to the playground, you start slapping them on the concrete and all of that. But through my teenage years and whatnot, I was more of like a video gamer, played a lot of computer games, same through university as well. And it was only sort of when my friend at a local card game store got Flesh and Blood in and said, hey, like, this is a new card game called Flesh and Blood. It's developed here in New Zealand. It seems pretty cool. That I really sort of got into card games as a whole. Like I was aware of Magic, I was aware of Yu-Gi-Oh, all those sorts of things. I knew they had their subcultures, but I'd never really engaged with them as a player. Like, properly went to the local game store, got involved with the community. And when I first tried Flesh and Blood, it was a really, really fun game. Like I played with the Ira deck versus like a slimmed down Bravo constructed deck. I beat the snot out of Vinny, my friend. I'm sorry, Vinny, but we had a blast, and I was hooked. I wanted to just play more, and the more I played, the more I wanted to collect the cards. The more I collected the cards, the more I wanted to play. And it just sort of became a cycle where I just got more and more involved. And I just thought, okay, can't miss out this week. I've got to go down to the local game store. I've got to play at the Armory. I've got to, see what these guys are doing with these decks. I want to, get my deck out and try my skills and learn more about this game because it was just so much fun. And yeah, it's sort of taken over my life a bit now.
Yeah, and so since your relationship to this game is at this point much more focused on your career, and maybe you didn't have quite the same magnetic draw to it that a lot of us other players did early on in life. Maybe the better question here is what draws you to rules and policy? Like what draws you to understanding the ins and outs, the minutia of each of these interactions that you deal with on a daily basis?
I think at first it was a way for me to be able to connect with the community. When I was
Hmm.
in Wellington and I was a university student, we were playing mostly casual games, just chilling out, having fun, connecting with the community and whatnot. And then I unfortunately had to move down to Christchurch for a new job. And I wanted to continue to connect with the community. And one of the ways that I could do that was being online in the Purple Discord, which was a lot smaller than it was, a lot smaller than it is now. And a lot of Americans were learning how to play the game. But of course, the rules around how to play the game were quite slim at the time. The only thing that we really had to go on was the Hero's Handbook, which was a very, very slimmed down version of the rules that vaguely described how things work. And of course, a little bit of the release notes and whatnot. And we, of course, with the release of Monarch, we had the Comprehensive Rules 1.0, which sort of clarified a bits and pieces here and there. But I really wanted to teach these people how to play the game, and I did that on TTS, Tabletop Simulator. And to teach people how to play the game, I had to know the rules really well. So I, spent a lot of time figuring out the rules, answering questions in the Purple Discord. It got to such a point as well that a lot of Americans knew what time I woke up in the morning because that would be the time that I had to answer questions, or like, there'd be a bunch of questions unanswered late at night, and then somebody would ping me as soon as my alarm would go off and be like, "Hey, Moonlight Solace, like, here are the questions that we couldn't answer last night. Can you like give us an answer?" And it's just, how I ended up engaging with the community for a long time rather than just going to the local armory. And then yeah, after that it just became more and more of my sort of my routine and how I engage with Flesh and Blood. And it got to the point where I was like, okay, now I need answers. I need to make sure that everything is consistent and clear and clean, and that we have a consensus about these really weird, unique, intrinsically difficult to set up situations. And yeah, that one thing led to another, and that became my job essentially.
It's strikes me as a very stark contrast because you know Flesh and Blood is not your only foray into gaming. You are a known hardcore gamer, and one of the things you committed very strongly to is the board game Go. Now, one of the things you've said that you love about this game is that the rules are incredibly simple, but the depth, the permutations that can arise when two masterful players sit down head to head are endless. So you've kind of ported yourself from a rule set that is almost like perfectly simple to one that is at this point. How many pages are the comprehensive rules?
I think that we have moved to an HTML format, which means that we can just say that it's 9 pages of
Oh, okay,
HTML.
just 9 pages. How many full page scrolls of my mouse wheel are we talking? Because when I was taking a look at it earlier, I think we'd be in definitely over 100.
Yeah, I mean when it was in PDF format, it was starting to creep up to about 150. And a lot of those are dedicated towards like each individual keyword. But the Fab engine is a complex system that requires a lot of description, I'd say.
And without a doubt, it's all good because ultimately it results in a game system that is beloved by a lot of people. But it does strike me that I'm somebody as well that appreciates something that is so simple and yet so complex. When you start bending the rules and experimenting with gameplay, Flesh and Blood is just not that though. It takes somebody that kind of enjoys their head hurting at least a little bit in their spare time to enjoy it. So I wonder, how do you kind of resolve the dissonance between those two kind of concepts, these two things that you've committed so much of your time to?
Well, I think that there are two sort of like they are two different games. Like when we're talking about Go, we're talking about like a perfect information game where the emergence comes from the however many choices you have on an open board, 361, and it sort of only starts to slim down point by point as you play. And I think that there is a lot of overlap in that with Fab, but the way that I sort of reconcile the two different systems where Fab is, has like cards and cards determine sort of almost their own rules in a way, is I sort of think of both rule sets from a computer science perspective of like, if I had to program this into a computer, how would I define each of these elements? How would I reconcile the game state moving from one state to another? Because essentially that's what a game is like your series of game states. You have a series of events that transition you from one state to another, and those events either happen from a card resolving or from a player's choice, and there's only a certain number of iterations that you can have, and it's just making sure that everything is consistent between like decisions that if you make if you have one game state and you have an event, that will always lead to exactly one game state. There's no discrepancies, there's no ambiguities. And that's sort of how I, reconcile my interest in the two. Like Go is obviously more perfect and beautiful and has, these really, really tight rules. As long as you're talking about one of the, relatively simple rule sets. But for Flesh and Blood, my aim is sort of to reconcile that with making it more consistent, making it more predictable, removing these ambiguities, and turning it into the system where an event moves game state to game state without any argument, essentially.
Not only did you commit wholly to playing the game of Go, you also became a community leader. You started a club when you were down in Wellington. And you also traveled to Japan to play with the best and the best. So how do you think that experience as a community leader informs the way that you show up for the Fab community now?
I think a lot of it sort of sparked my interest in helping other people have fun. One of the things I loved about Go was bringing people into the game and watching them enjoy themselves. I know a lot of people that started Go out of just a curiosity of like, hey, what's this game? Like, oh, this is kind of fun. This is cool. This is interesting. And have become like almost dedicated players, turning up to, play at their local club once a week for years now, or planning to go to Japan, or planning to enter like the National Go tournament here in New Zealand. And it has just been such a blessing to be able to bring an enjoyment or a hobby to somebody's attention and really let them thrive in that. And that's the same with Flesh and Blood as well. One of the things I enjoy most about Flesh and Blood is watching other people enjoy Flesh and Blood. Like when I see new people at the armories every week, calling out their favorite deck and, coming up to me and being like, hey, Josh, I just built this deck, or what do you think of this? Or like, I just got into this new hero and I'm starting to like, collect these cards. Do you have any of these? And it just brings me a lot of joy that I can facilitate that in some way by either being a reference for the rules, being a judge, sometimes even just being a source of cards, just being like, hey, like I have all these other majestics or commons or rares or whatever that I'm happy to share with people who need them. And from Go to Flesh and Blood, a lot of that has carried over of just, trying to make the best of the community.
It makes me wonder, are there any specific strategies that you developed in teaching Go that is, I don't know, perhaps bled or made its way into our Learn to Play program?
I'm still honestly working on how to introduce people to Flesh and Blood. Still perfecting how to introduce people into Flesh and Blood. It's definitely a challenge due to how complex, how varied, how wide Flesh and Blood is. Unlike Go, where you have like a single point of attack, where you sort of like slowly introduce through a capturing game into a 9x9 game, into maybe 13x13, or jumping straight into 19x19. With Flesh and Blood, it's like, okay, what hero do you start with? What format do you start with? When do you start to tell them about things like limited, sealed, draft? constructed, living legend, blitz, commoner, like, how do you get them to be interested in a particular hero, or what sort of cards do you give them? And so much of that in Flesh and Blood is dependent on, where do they come from? Are they familiar with card games? What card games have they played before? Are they interested in go wide, go tall? How much time do you have? Sometimes I've helped people learn how to play the game before they play their first calling, and that is a huge challenge, because it's like, okay, here is your deck that you've been provided by, like, someone or someone we know. Let me teach you how to play this deck before your first round of the calling. And because there's so many different ways to teach Flesh and Blood, I feel like unfortunately, there's no, one size fits all. But a lot of it comes down to just, really trying to understand where the person is in their understanding, like, how they approach learning, how they approach the game, and just trying to add piece by piece to their understanding of the game so that they eventually learn the game as a whole.
Oddly enough, it kind of sounds like what you're saying is that the way to teach Flesh and Blood is the way to teach people. It's learning how to nurture them. It's learning how to love them and meet them where they're at in certain respects.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a succinct way of putting it, for sure.
Well, that's awesome, Josh. More discussion on that is never a bad thing, I don't think. And it makes me want to segue into a question that I didn't prep you for, which is, are you at all involved in, like, I know you're not part of development, right? You're not part of balance or anything like that. But because the Learn to Play program is kind of under the umbrella of the Judge program, does that mean you are giving your say on, like, first strike decks, for instance, or introducing new product for the purposes of teaching people?
I am able to voice my opinion and have some influence on how we develop products, but honestly, I think that a lot of the player experience is better left to the developers and the design team. I don't get often to play much Flesh and Blood in the office, and unlike the developers who get to play Flesh and Blood 40 hours a week, I think that they have a much better grasp on, how players intuitively play cards and the play experience. But what I can do is I often spend my time with our judge program manager, Klaus Lossiker, and we talk about how we develop our judges to be able to teach the game, get them certified for their Learn to Play certificate, as well as, improve their skills, get them staffed at these events, and get them out there. And I feel like that is where I'm more comfortable being at this point in development.
So you're not involved in actually creating the product, but I'm guessing you have a pretty strong opinion about, or maybe a, like, come to Jesus realization moment when, for example, a product is released that goes, the light bulb goes off and you go, I can really teach somebody in a fun way how to play Flesh and Blood. I mean, did you have that kind of visceral reaction with, for example, First Strike decks or any other product?
Well, First Strike decks, when they came across my desk, were already pretty fleshed out. I was really excited to see them because it was a really clean looking set of cards, very easy to sort of identify what the strategies of those heroes were, as well as, those heroes being new and interesting. And I was really excited for the product because it was sort of that middle ground, that sort of step up, going from an IRA welcome deck where you're basically playing a mirror in a format that, isn't competitive. It's a IRA welcome deck is 30 cards, 3 copies of each card, no equipment, which is, a pretty big deviation when you try to jump up to something like Blitz or Classic Constructed. So to have the First Strike decks there was really cool and really exciting, because it's like, okay, it bridges a lot of that gap. It bridges that valley that we had when you try to transition somebody off the IRA deck into our main competitive formats. And it's like, okay, cool. We've got 2 well-established heroes. Their play patterns are well-established, well-documented. We've got people trained on how to explain these because, they're 2 predictable heroes in the Learn to Play kit. and that has just made things so much easier for the onboarding experience for the new Flesh and Blood player.
All right, enough about Flesh and Blood because that's not what this section is about. This section is about you, Joshua. So let's deviate away from that real quick. Besides your foray into card games and your illustrious career that you've now built around it, going on 4 years, am I right at this point?
Yep, that's right.
Pretty exciting. You went to school for computer graphics and computer science and also philosophy, I took note of. You are also the co-founder of a gamified balance board called Sweebo.
Yeah. So, quick correction. So, I didn't do philosophy at university. I got a doctorate of philosophy, also known as a PhD in computer graphics.
Oh, I understand. This
Um,
is my weakness in higher education showing its ugly head.
no, that's no worries. Honestly, I spent the better half of probably 10 years at university. I got a Bachelor of Computer Science, a postgraduate diploma in computer graphics, and then a PhD in computer graphics. And while I was there, I was doing tutoring and teaching. I was a teaching fellow for a little bit. And then it was it was around COVID that I wasn't able to continue my path as a teacher. So I ended up moving down to Christchurch and eventually became rules and policy manager. But Sweebo is really interesting. It's back in the days I had I'm trying to remember if I had finished. I think I just finished uh my degree in computer science, and we had the summer where you could apply for an entrepreneurial kind of boot camp. And what I had heard about it is that it was a game making boot camp. Like, you get together with a bunch of coders and designers, and you get to make a video game, and you get to try and, like, bring it to market essentially. And I was like, yeah, this is cool. And then when we got there, they decided that the year that I was doing it, they wanted to create a more physical product, which I was honestly less excited about. But eventually we landed on the sort of niche market of, like, hey, how can we create something that involves tech and physical health, something to, like, aid in physical health. And we saw a space for balance board being used as a physio exercise, but, looking at ways to be able to motivate people and be able to gauge their progress using the balance board. So we came up with this way to be able to, like, this balance board that you could just put your phone in. The phone connects to your computer. You download this app, and essentially you can play games using your balance board as the controller. And it would basically guide you through the motions of, rolling around on the balance board, basically balancing or strengthening your ankles, or, balancing in one place and then resting, and all to sort of, like, control a character. Or I think we had, like, a spaceship running through a tunnel at one point for a game.
That's the one I saw.
Um,
Honestly, it looked pretty dang cool, Josh.
it was a very, very cool project. I spent most of my time doing the programming in the background for the Wi-Fi connection. We tested out Bluetooth. We also tested out Arduinos instead of using phones. And the company name as well. It was tentatively called the Switchboard. I don't know why it was called the Switchboard. It was like the project name essentially, and we were trying to come up with what the company name was. And like all things, it was just like, what if we just shorten it to Sweebo? Oh, I don't know about that. That sounds really weird and lame. Okay, well, if we can't come up with anything better, it's going to be called Sweebo. And it ended up just being called Sweebo, which I it's just how things go sometimes. But it was a fun project that I was involved in for a while. But eventually I got more interested in just teaching at university, so I left the company, and I honestly haven't even looked back.
Well, I'm here to give you a lens into the past. Follow-up question: do you have a Sweebo in your home by chance?
I do not,
Oh,
unfortunately. I know. I apologize. I think that it would have been a cool thing to to show you on camera if I did, but I think the prototype that I got when I was working for the company, I left when I left at the company when I left them.
That's tragic. I had a picture in my mind of you doing a brainstorming sesh about, like, I don't know, rules 3.0 on the balance board, kind of throwing a ball against the wall or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it would be good. I am actually, I do injure my ankle a lot playing badminton, so maybe I should reinvest in Sweebo for my
You're
own
a
personal
badminton
benefit.
player.
Yes, yeah. I played a lot when I was in high school competitively, and then now I just play casually down at the Canterbury Badminton Centre.
That sounds like a great time. I honestly haven't dabbled in badminton since I was very, very young, but I remember it being an absolute blast.
It is a surprisingly tough sport. I think a lot of people's first iteration of badminton is like when they play in high school and they're gingerly hitting the shuttlecock over the net.
Oh, and when they're like
With
forced to for PE or something like that.
yeah, yeah, that's right.
It seems like
But
such a delicate thing, though, when you first get your hands on it, you're like, I don't want to break it. But you can
oh,
wail on that thing.
yeah, it certainly is. When you start to play competitively, you really start to pick up how quick and precise the shuttlecock can be hit, and it is the I believe it is the fastest racket sport in the world, which is like the most number of volleys per second in an average
Oh.
game. And so I think even the fastest shuttlecock might exceed the fastest squash ball hit. I think that was a thing that was established recently, but I don't know. I haven't looked into it for a while.
Always looking at these things through a computer scientist's mind, I have to harken back to. So,
Yeah.
Josh, there's a lot more to you than cardboard and syntax, and also shuttlecocking and computer sciencing. You do have a creative side, which generally manifests in the form of sidewalk art. Do you still keep up with it?
I haven't for a while. So at least when I came down to Christchurch, I haven't really found a good spot to be able to express my sidewalk art. But I do keep up with drawing. So I have a little art book that I occasionally doodle in. And I finally got a new laptop with a stylus. So I'm hoping that when I do more travel, that I'll be able to do some more doodling there too. But yeah, I really hope that I do get back into sidewalk art because that was an extremely fun time for sure.
What is it about it that draws you to the medium? I wonder if I don't know, for me personally, looking at it through a different lens, I would kind of have a hang up of spending so much time on this thing that ultimately ends up being temporary.
I think honestly that's part of the draw to it.
Mm.
I don't really look back at my old artwork and say like, man, I really wish I like keeping this around. I don't know if it's about my artwork in particular, but there's something quite freeing about doing something you know is only temporary and only going to sort of like exist in, your memory or like the memory of others that see it. When I was doing it at first, so the first thing that really kicked off me doing sidewalk art is I was trying to do something really romantic for my wife. I like drew a big like Valentine's heart made out of puzzle pieces on the waterfront at Wellington for a Valentine's Day, and I thought it was really cool. Like I learned a lot about how the medium works. I just like got some really cheap sidewalk chalk from a $2 store. Um, I learn about like how much patience and dedication and planning goes into it. And it was just something really like cool to be expressive about like this medium where you could say, hey, I'm going to plan to do this. I'm going to maybe work with perspective. Maybe I'll work with colors. Maybe I'll, try something a bit harder with like shadows and negative space. And you go out, you do it, you chat with some people as they walk past you. You get angry at people on bikes driving over your artwork because you forgot to put cones out. But it was just like therapeutic in a way. Like, there's a way to sort of express my artwork and not feel self-conscious about like whether or not it was good or bad. because I knew that it was only going to be temporary. And it just sort of allowed me to, just do what I wanted to do and, try and achieve something and then look back at it and be proud. And then it's gone. It can be replaced by the next one. Um, and being able to do it in public as well is kind of like also freeing. I don't know if you know this, but I do spend a lot of my time holed up in my room, either working on when I back in the days computer science, or nowadays the rules and policy. So being able to do something creative and expressive outdoors in public was, just a cool way to sort of just be outside.
I kind of wonder if there's a beautiful little allegory of life mixed in there with the sidewalk art. I mean, all of our time here on Earth is temporary, and what we leave here, and whether or not we're obsessed with legacy or what remains behind, generally kind of points to whether it's a healthy passing or not. I don't know. Do you have any? Is there something there, or am I shooting at? I don't know what the expression would be. Shooting at stars with a 9mm. I don't know.
I honestly, I think that, nothing really has meaning until you give it meaning. Like, for me, art is about expression and how it makes you feel and how you want to express it. And I think that for me, being able to just like express my art through like, temporary sidewalk chalk art is just a way for me to be free to be able to express without, thinking about, oh, what if somebody later down the line sees this and thinks that I'm a bad artist, or, looking back at it and being critical of myself and my own artwork. Like, I think that it's just a freeing medium for me to be able to do the things that I want to do, and that means something to me. And I'm not, I don't really care if it doesn't mean if it means something else or doesn't mean anything to anyone else at all. Like, it's all for my personal enjoyment and my expression of the art form, and that's enough for me to be able to continue to do it.
And the value is in how you feel and how much you enjoy doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that goes back to a lot of things. Like, I think that a lot of people assign a lot of meaning to their hobbies or their interests and what it means to them. And, occasionally we can be led astray by, I'm interested in this because I want other people to know I'm interested in it. And it's about other people's enjoyment or the meaning that other people assign to it. But I think that the most important thing when it comes to doing a hobby or doing something you enjoy or that you like is that it means something to you, and it's something that you enjoy, and it's how you express yourself or you engage with the world. And chalk art was just one of the things, or is one of the things that does that for me.
And I think that's an important lesson, as you mentioned, for everybody abroad, but also specifically for Flesh and Blood players. It is a competitive environment, but the results are not the intrinsic value in what you do. If you love doing it, show up to armories and continue playing those games. I'll get off my soapbox now. Well, so it strikes me that your job requires an efficient use of syntax and a focus on clarity of the written word. It makes me think that your punctuation, for one, is immaculate when you text. Am I right about that? I'm one of those two. You can come out to me.
Honestly, you're probably wrong there. I've struggled to keep up with punctuation and grammar and styles and whatnot with my current role. Don't get me wrong, like I think there is definitely an overlap when it comes to syntax when you're coming from a computer science background where things have to be in a very a very strict order. It all has to be very correct and precise. But it does fall off a little bit when we work with the English language, because a lot of the times it comes down to how you naturally would read it or interpret it, and not necessarily about it being syntactically consistent.
It's curious because it's almost like computer science in certain respects is like, I don't know, maybe not the highest, but like the most direct form of writing rules and policy, right? Because you do it right and the computer understands the correct outcome and does the thing that the program's supposed to do. In our case, obviously, you're dealing with the English language, which has been modified and molded over the course of many millennia at this point, and is thereby a little imperfect, and so are the people that are interpreting it. But ultimately, you want to get the same result in a certain respect, right? Like, you want to be able to write a program that functions every single time we have a calling, every single time we have a feature match, etc.
Yep, yep, absolutely. And we over the course of the years when we develop new cards and new ways we want to be able to express effects and whatnot, the guide that we have, the internal guide that we have for our syntax, sort of becomes more refined. It evolves. It occasionally changes when we realize that we want to we want to achieve certain goals. And the way that I look at it is the most important thing when it comes to writing effects on cards is that the player understands the intention for what the card should be doing. Um, and like we use things like reminder text. We often change how like sometimes we'll functionally change an effect or an ability because we want to convey meaning and understanding a little bit more. But ultimately, making the player understand the card is the primary goal. But working towards that, coming from a computer science background, I've had a more analytical view of making sure things are in the correct order and have certain structure. But that clashing with the English language in particular has been a large. It's been a large hurdle that we have had to overcome.
So maybe punctuation isn't your bag, but do you have a particular affinity or love for language in general?
Yeah, I certainly do. I can certainly appreciate language construction and how we communicate because I think communication is probably one of the most important aspects of life, to be honest. We live in a society, and that requires us to be able to effectively communicate not only our intentions but also how we feel and what we want to achieve or what we want to do or what has happened. And we can only sort of really get along if we're able to effectively communicate. And the way that languages have evolved to be able to sate that particular need is thoroughly fascinating. Like, you look at the Korean writing system that was created by one of their, I'm trying to remember the name of, it was the emperor or king that invented the writing system. And it was to sate the need of, teaching the people how to communicate, how to read, how to write, using the Korean language rather than the outdated Chinese writing system. Or even things like color theory. Coming from a graphics background, I had a particular fascination with how we described colors and learning how languages develop words for colors in particular order based on how important they are to, everyday life. Starting with words for black and white, and then red, and then I think it's blue, and then I think it's green and yellow come next. And like, depending on how many basic words you have in your language, they always develop in a certain order because of how important it is to be able to effectively communicate those basic color terms. So I certainly have a huge appreciation for how different languages communicate, but it all comes down to, of course, that effective communication, how we can effectively communicate.
You are prone to research rabbit holes, aren't you, my friend?
Yeah, a little bit.
That's awesome. Must make life rather rich. It was King Sejong the Great, by the way, in the 15th century. Just wanted to
Thank
be
you.
able to slot
I
that nugget into your head.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I need
So,
to rewatch The King's Letters. There's an amazing movie that goes over that topic, which is very, very cool.
I'll have to add that to my watch list. Not the King's Speech we're talking about, right?
No, no, The King's Letters.
Kidding, of course. King's Speech, a great movie in its own right, but it's a little more English in its subject matter. You are also engaged, Josh, in what I would argue is performance art. And speaking of communication, this is probably some of the most effective communication that I've ever seen in art, your Blue Sky profile, which I only just realized is you, by the way. I was just following this profile, seeing little tidbits every day, wondering like, who the hell? Why is my algorithm giving me this? I'm here for flesh and blood and nothing else. But anyway, I digress. Your Blue Sky profile is a waiting for Godot-esque window into the mundane moments of your daily life. And maybe I should read a couple examples. One day ago, just had a nice walk along the beach. 2 days ago, dinner with the family tonight. My favorite diatribe was actually two or three posts long. Yes, first one was something about how you think the clock is getting low on battery. Second one is, yep, got to go get batteries. Third one, yeah, the remote batteries were low too. What a coincidence. What inspired this kind of online presence?
It's funny you say that. So, I don't really engage with social media very much. Like obviously I joined Facebook when I was in my teens. I posted up a few pictures, but I just never really sort of found it productive to just like post up what I was doing or try to make a big deal of things. Like if I wanted to talk to someone, I just felt far more fulfilled just talking to them or meeting up or catching up and that sort of a thing. And then as time was going on, I didn't really do anything with my Facebook. I only really used it to, engage with Flesh and Blood. And then I was watching a, I was watching a special by the comedian Bill Bailey, and he remarked about how when he got on Twitter, he didn't realize that there were 7 other people pretending to be Bill Bailey before him, and they were having a much more exciting time than him. And he like they were posting about going skydiving and stuff like that. And the quote was like, I was just posting up stuff like might have a Jaffa cake in a minute, and I don't know what it was about that, but I thought that was utterly hilarious. And I was like, you know what? Maybe my online presence could be something similar, where it's just like it really is just the real day-to-day mundane. If you want to know what I'm doing, this is literally what my life is. This is literally what I'm doing. As I say to people, I like to keep it real on Blue Sky. I'm probably the realest Blue Skyer there is.
Far realer than me, and it's not even close. So folks, we'll plug it at the end of the video as well, but do yourself a favor, go ahead and follow jjscott.nz on Blue Sky. I didn't even know it was him, and I was enjoying these posts for a very long time. At this point, Josh, I do think we need to deviate a little bit and start talking about Flesh and Blood a little bit more. Are you game for that?
Of course.
You are the grand arbiter of justice in Flesh and Blood, and your origin story is one that I'm not kidding, every American dreams of. You peppered James White and Jason Chung with enough intricate rules questions that you convinced them that you were better suited to writing rules and policy than they were, ultimately. To fully translate it into the American vernacular, you win on Flesh and Blood Shark Tank and got funded. Did you expect this outcome when you approached Jason?
Not at all, honestly. I don't know what I was thinking, to be honest. I originally went up to this calling in Auckland with the idea that I wanted to become a Flesh and Blood judge. I didn't even know what it meant to judge card games. I thought it was a volunteer position. You didn't get paid. You just did it out of the kindness of your own heart for your community. I was, bright-eyed. I, bought my own ticket up there. I bought my hotel accommodation, the cheapest I could afford. And I went in not knowing anything about judging. I just got given a judge shirt. I just got told what to do. Had to hand out papers, collect them, all that sort of a thing. But I also had like the sub goal while I was there. I, had been teaching people how to play Flesh and Blood for a while, and there were just a few things that didn't quite make sense with the rules. So I had 18 questions in a Google Doc that I sort of had compiled together over the past month. And I was like, right, when I get a chance, I'm going to ask the developers, I'm going to ask someone here what the answers to these questions are. Like, I don't even know who's part of the team. All I know is James White is the head I know Kieran is the person that's running, who's the TO for the tournament. That's There's the only people that I know here as part of LSS. So we had a dinner on the Saturday night, I think, at a Mexican place, and I got invited as part of the staff, and it was all LSS people there. We were having, Mexican dinner, and I was eating, and I just offhandedly mentioned like I've got these like questions that I need to ask someone. I was just mentioning to somebody next to me, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you should just ask James, like at the head of the table." And James sort of asked me like, "What's going on?" I sort of like gave him the first question, and it stumped him. I can't even remember what it was. I think it was something to do with intimidate. Oh no, it was something to do with the brute card. It's the one where it's like it gives your next attack action card the ability that when it's defended by fewer than 2 cards, it gets +4. Barraging Beatdown.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked him a question about Barraging Beatdown, and he sort of like thought about it for a while, and he's like, okay, this is, I can't do this tonight. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Like, we'll figure this out tomorrow. So we do the whole event the next day. We get almost to like we get to the end of top 8. We're just like running side events and everything. And I go up to Jason Chung and I'm like, hey, I can't find James. I kind of wanted to like ask him these questions. Can I ask you or can I ask somebody else in LSS? And Jason like is looking at these questions. He's just like, oh yeah, no, we'll get James in on this. He goes find James and we go like to the back and we start sitting down. And I'm fully expecting just to be blown off by some of these questions. I'm expecting that some of them are just going to be like, oh yeah, it just works this way, like who cares kind of thing.
Because even if there was no ill intent behind it, you kind of were blown off a little bit when you first tried to introduce it, right?
Yeah, it was more like, okay, well, they're busy running an event.
Yep.
Maybe this wasn't like the appropriate time and place to ask these sorts of questions. But
you went back
I
in
was,
for it.
I was being naive. I was just like, I just want answers, and this is a cool environment, and I'll be able to talk to them and explain the question in person, which is much, much easier than over text. Uh, yeah, we got to the point where it was 3.5 hours in, and the event had finished up. Everyone had gone home, and like LSS was basically packing up, and the company, like the team members and whatnot, started crowding around while we were finishing off the final questions. And honestly, I was expecting like that was going to be the end of it. I had answered all of these questions. I had got a yes, no, maybe from James and Jason. And I was like, cool, I'm satisfied. I can go back to the community and answer their questions. Thank you. And James is like, yeah. How much do you like your current job? And it was just like, turn around from there. Like, just like completely blindsided and everything changed.
What was your current job at the time?
I was working for a German advertising company called Stroa Labs in Christchurch. It's for a online advertising company called Stroa in Germany, who mainly do billboard advertising. It's what we were working on. But it was, for me, it was basically just a junior intermediate software engineering job, just working on back end stuff and just trying to make ends meet at that point in time.
So what you're telling me is that becoming the rules and policy manager for Flesh and Blood sounded cooler to you than back end billboards.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right. Well, if that sounds crazy to you at home, then you're not alone. I'm just kidding. That's a way cooler job. So, did you? I mean, I'm assuming you never looked back. I'm just gonna go ahead and take that at face value. What makes this though, 4 years in, Josh, your dream job?
Honestly, I think there's probably 3 aspects to it. Number one is probably the sense of fulfillment, the fact that like what I'm giving out to the community, what I'm contributing is improving people's experience of the game, people's experience of life sometimes as well.
Mm.
Being able to like even see that in person, being able to like be like, yeah, I worked on that card, or I, changed the rules, or I updated this rule, or I clarified this, or did this, and it led to this scenario where somebody was satisfied with the experience, or knowing that I've contributed to the experience as a whole, and the fulfillment that I get out of that is second to none. I think the other part of it as well is being heard within the company as well. Working at university and working within a software team, especially as a lower rung developer, it's very hard to get your voice heard or to get enough rep to be understood or to have enough reputation to be taken seriously. But here at LSS, it feels like even when I first started a rules and policy manager, my suggestions, some were dumb now looking back at it, but what I said had a certain weight even as soon as I got into the job. Like, ideas were taken seriously. I took the work very seriously, and I got rewarded by James and the development team, the design team, marketing, everyone. Treating my position as someone who can influence parts and aspects of the games to improve it, and that filled me with a lot of fulfillment as well in that aspect. And I guess the third thing would probably be the travel. Being able to engage with the international community is just an amazing experience. I have met so many friends I would never have had the opportunity to meet. I have been to places and had experiences that I never would have dreamed of before. And all of that, of course, is due to the ability to travel for these large events for Flesh and Blood. These tier 4 events where Pro Tours and World Championships bring people from literally all corners of the world together. And that is just an experience I probably wouldn't find with any other job.
I want to spend a little bit more time in point number 1, because making the game more enjoyable, more clear for players everywhere is kind of part and parcel the exact objective you went to that first event in Auckland with in your head. Those 18 questions, the sole purpose, because you didn't know you were about to get a job offer, was to clarify a lot for the community. So, in a sense, you're accomplishing that ultimate goal.
Yeah. Except now I've got more sway to be able to change the rules, and I'm getting paid to do it, so it makes it a lot easier.
Okay, moving to a little bit of tournament policy here, Josh. This is going to be one of the harder questions. One of the most contentious tournament policies, at least in the circles I run in, is that of the concession window after time is called. It's easy to understand your reasoning, don't get me wrong, which in other appearances you've hashed out quickly as like, we don't want to encourage time for people to draw a concession out of a lesser experienced opponent, or lead to 5 minutes of discussion trying to figure out who won the event or not. But the way I'd like to approach this question for you, and to explore perhaps negative outcomes that you've experienced as a result of this policy, I do want to start with a little bit of an anecdote from a couple teammates on the AG Pro team who were pitted against one another at the higher tables of US Nats. I should preface this by saying all these details are secondhand to me, but in any case, I think it's a pretty good thought experiment. So, one player is on Kasai, the other is on Gravy Bones. We reach a game state where a Whaler Humperdinck is on the board, and both players, in hindsight, agree that if this Whaler Humperdinck is removed, the Kasai wins the game because there's not enough damage left in the Gravy Bones deck. The Kasai doesn't have much left in deck, but as long as they can clear that Whaler Humperdinck, they win in a fatigue state, right? So, last game action that happens before time is called is the activation of a gold token from our Kasai player. Card is ready to be drawn. Time is called. Judge approaches his table, says that's time in the round, normal tournament policy. Kasai player is not allowed to look at the card drawn. What they're looking for is a source of go again for the Centauri Saber, which ensures that this Whaler Humperdinck dies. The judges, after deliberation, this player appeals the decision to not let him look at the card drawn off the gold token, blah, 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 blah. Basically, the Kasai player has to decide then and there whether or not to concede. He thinks he's got the go again source in that card that's being drawn, which then passes over to the Gravy Bones player, who does what he feels in his mind is the right thing, concedes. flip the card over, not a source of go again. So I just wonder, there's a long way of setting up. Is there a way to respect the implication of, lesser experienced or players that are just not willing to fight or maybe angle shoot as hard as somebody else, while also protecting the integrity of resolving what has been a great game and then sort of falls flat basically because of an anticlimactic finish?
It's an interesting discussion. It's something that I always refer to is like there's no perfect policy and good policy takes time. I think there might be a world where we look at the policy again, we relax these restrictions, and we try to accommodate situations like you've described to finish off a great game with a great finish. I think that focusing on particular circumstances or particular outcomes, or particular instances where this policy doesn't necessarily meet the perfect expectation, doesn't necessarily show the whole story though. When it comes to the feedback that we've received, we have received obviously negative feedback where players are unhappy with the concession policy, which we have feedback about all policy in some regards, but we've also received a huge amount of positive feedback from players regarding the concession policy. I get a lot of judges who report players at not only their local armories, but also their Prod Quests and Road to Nationals, where players have approached them and said that they appreciate the concession policy because in other card games or other tournaments for other games, they've felt pressured or they have been pressured by their opponent to concede because they're new or they're inexperienced or they could have won but the opponent talked them out that they couldn't have won. And I think that when we look at this particular policy regarding concessions at the end of the game, I think that it's more important to focus on ensuring that a game comes to completion before concession, before the time is called, and accommodating situations for our player base in the broadest scope with the concession policy than it is to try and accommodate particular circumstances where we're expecting games to go over time and expecting players to be able to get as much information as possible before making a concession. That being said, though, like I think there is certainly reason to continue looking at the concession policy, but I feel like there's not enough evidence within the community that that's the right thing to do for the overall player experience.
And I do have to mention at this point that I am in general a fan of this policy. It is kind of these very pointed circumstances that make me question that. Namely because I've been on the receiving end of not necessarily angle shooting, but kind of like pressure. And in one of those situations with so many people sitting around you, and for that matter, probably like 2 to 3 judges at that point, if you're at like a calling level of event, if you're just the person that doesn't kind of understand the gamification of what is going on there, you often feel the pressure just inherently to take a back seat, give the concession because you don't really know what's going on. So I wonder if that is ultimately what we're trying to avoid with this policy, is that kind of like the requirement to know a tier above what is going on over your opponent, like that gamification aspect of trying to get a concession out of your opponent.
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be an element of, the community that's going to try and take as much advantage of any given situation as possible. And that's just, that's just what comes when you create a competitive environment. People looking for edges, people looking for that 1% that ability to be able to get that 1% that puts them above the rest, that bubbles them into top 8, and then sets them up for a win. And our policy is aimed at trying to create a better play experience, trying to create the best game possible. And like I said, our focus is primarily on trying to get people to complete games within the time. But of course, we've also got to deal with the logistical issues of things like making sure the round completes on time. We can't just play infinitely long rounds. And as soon as you start to relax the policy, you invite other complications regarding, okay, what's the timeliness regarding discussion? How long can you look at the game state or look through hands, or how long can you talk about the game state? How long do you give these players before they can make their concession? Or like, there's so many moving elements and so many aspects to this that need to be considered before a change in policy is enacted. And I feel like where we are with the policy, I'm actually very satisfied where we are with the policy. It was a long way to get here, based on considering the policy that we started with when Flesh and Blood first hit the tournament scene.
And actually, maybe it's a good time to harken back to that policy, because honestly, I don't really remember it. Like, how did we used to deal with concessions? Maybe it's a good thing to look back and see where we've come from.
I'm trying to remember. I can't remember what the very first policy was, but I believe an early policy was 3 turns after you had completed, or it might have even been 5 turns. But that led to extremely long end games where after time was called, time in the round was extended by like 10 minutes for people to be able to play out those turns. And we had reports of many players having negative experience lots of negative experiences with extremely experienced card players playing against, people playing their first calling, for example, where they would coerce them to concede when time was called, or coerce them into giving up that concession. And that influenced a lot of how we shaped our concession policy. And I do honestly feel like we are where we need to be right now. And of course that may change over time as the community adapts, as the community evolves, as we start to get larger and we grow. But yeah, it's all amount of, good policy takes time.
You mentioned those players that are always looking for a 1% edge. In any legal system, there's an inherent push and pull between the spirit of the law and the letter of the law, and I'm sure Flesh and Blood is no different. We've discussed a very intricate problem that you've had to deal with in terms of the concession policy and the way you met what the player base ultimately wants, or trying to, at the very least. In general, do you find it really difficult to find a middle ground between rigidity and flexibility in order to strike a balance between the letter and the spirit of the law? Is it difficult for you personally to try to like get in that mindset of the 1% angle shooters?
I think so. There's a real distinction between rules and policy. The rules obviously have to be as rigid as possible. How the game functions needs to be exacting. It needs to be specific. It needs to be predictable. If you play this card and your opponent does this, this is what happens. When it comes to the policy aspect and how players behave, or what the expectations are, what their responsibilities are, how do you deal with infractions, there is a lot more flexibility involved in that. When James talked to me about creating the judge program, when I first started up as a rules and policy manager, and he said to me that he didn't want judges to rule specifically and only by the book. He didn't want judges to, look at a situation, look at a handbook, and just deal out a punishment without considering the context or without considering what has happened. If there's some easier way to fix a game state, if the punishment doesn't necessarily fit what has happened or what the intentions are, there's a degree of flexibility where we can deviate in certain cases to create a better player experience. And when we created the tournament rules and policy and, started to train up a lot of our judges, I really pushed for ensuring that, when judges are making a ruling, that there is a consideration that there are deviations that can be made. And that being said, like, you can't deviate all the time. We don't want to deviate on every single infraction. That's not how the rules and policy works. But when it comes to, especially when we're judging these high level events where everything is absolutely on the line, and ruling by the book can completely ruin sometimes even both players' experience of the game. There are cases where some flexibility can be used to resolve the situation while maintaining the integrity of the tournament, while maintaining the player experience, and that involves deviating from the rules in that regard. So when it comes to creating the rules and policy, they are created in the mind that there are no deviations at that point in time, but that in extreme circumstances, or certain specific circumstances, that the judges have the ability, or the head judge has the ability to deviate from that, and that the judges have the knowledge and capability to be able to deal with unlisted circumstances as well.
You've often mentioned that your inspiration for the way you approach building and training everyone in the judge program is customer service. And also, you often harken back to the philosophy in the sky of Flesh and Blood, bringing people together in the flesh and blood, of course, through the common language of great games.
Hey, this guy knows it.
I got there. I got there. I wonder if you can speak to some of your inspirations for the customer service part of it, because you don't seem to have any of that built into like your resume, or your job history. So I wonder like where you kind of pluck and pull from to build the judge program.
I think that a lot of our customer service training for judges comes from the judge community itself. Like, I don't think that I've never looked at it as if that I could just train up all of our judges around the world. I can certainly put these rules in place. I can create rules and policy documents. I can create articles. I can occasionally go and give, seminars and whatnot. But ultimately, when it comes to training and spreading that knowledge and experience, it really comes down to the judge program. And I am so appreciative of the time and the effort and the expertise that the program has sort of like output to everyone. And it comes from all sorts. Like, we've got old judges from Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh, Pokemon. We've got people from different industries, like whether or not it's, card game related or not, coming in to, teach people how to, deal with certain situations or look for certain things. And all of that knowledge accumulates and mixes when we share our expertise, especially at these large events where we have these judge seminars, we have these judge conferences, and we teach each other and we learn from each other. So I wouldn't say that it's not a downside that I don't have a huge background in customer service. I feel like I'm an effective communicator. I've learned a lot about effective communication and about expressing my thoughts in a way that allows people to understand where I'm coming from. And I feel like I'm an effective listener as well. Like, I focus on when people give feedback, I focus on why they're giving feedback, what they want from that feedback, or what changes they expect to occur. But that I can definitely share to the community. But it's all part of this bigger initiative that everybody brings something to the table and everybody can learn something from somebody else.
An inspiring prospect, to be sure. Recently, you were forced to take a good hard look at how LSS deals with slow play infractions and penalties at competitive events. How did you approach it philosophically once you knew the issue was there? And how did you find an equitable policy solution?
Well, slow play is a hard one. Slow play is like the boogeyman of all card games. It's the ever present problem that can never really be solved in a
Explain
way.
that a little more.
So with a card game, you have so many options for any given move. You have so many decisions about what you can do, and every decision that you make, uh, and especially in Flesh and Blood and Magic the Gathering and anything that requires cooperation from your opponent, or has the ability for your opponent to interject or respond, uh, things get really mucky in being able to time keep. You can't just set a clock on the table and expect people to keep their own time. There's a whole bunch of priority passes that just would be unfeasible, would be a logistical nightmare to keep track of. In addition to that, when you play a physical card game, there are a lot of shortcuts, there are a lot of out of order plays that you can make to keep the game engaging. It's how you would naturally play. We don't go through playing a card by following each of the individual steps to play a card. We put the card down, we pitch for it. But we don't necessarily put the card down, declare the targets, declare the modes, declare how much we're paying for it, then pay that cost, and then announce that the card is played. Like, we take these shortcuts or these micro steps away so that we can play the game more naturally. And that adds to the logistical difficulty of tracking, how much time is spent, or, how much time is meant to be used for any given action. So when it comes to slow play, the other side of that is that we want games to finish within a reasonable time. And we also want players to be engaged. We don't want an opponent waiting 10 minutes for the for the player to make a move. We want, the pace of play to be rigorous and at a reasonable pace. So the slow play issue basically comes to fruition when you sit down two players together and you say, all right, this game needs to finish within a certain amount of time, and you want players to be able to express their skill through their cards, but you want them to do that in a reasonable amount of time. And sometimes asking players to speed up their play can interfere with their decision making abilities, or can interfere with the minor edge that they may gain from going through their opponent's graveyard for the 50th time. So when it comes to looking at slow play, we have to take an approach that, works with the logistics of the tournament and also works with the player experience. And not just the players that are sitting down at the table, it can also include the players that are viewing. It could also include the judges that are watching. And the approach that we take is basically a very subjective approach. We have seminars when it comes for judges to talk about identifying slow play, and that's things like looking through graveyard more than once during a turn, taking more than a minute on a simple blocking decision. One of the bits of advice that we give to a judge is, if you walk up to a table and you can read every single card that is face up and in the player's hand at that table and make a reasonable choice for them, and they haven't made a single move, then that's an indication that slow play might be occurring. And so when it comes to creating the slow play policy, it needs to be an education-driven approach rather than one that is specifically, black and white, draw the line in the rules and policy. There is no way in hell that we're going to enforce judge, time clocks or chess clocks at the table, at least while I'm rules and policy manager. And we certainly don't want to create a situation where you say, hey, you've got 30 seconds for a move, and let's say you make 50 moves in your turn because you're playing a super long turn. That would end up being a 25-minute long turn. We certainly don't want to create a way for players to, specifically have the ability to extend the game. It just comes down to educating the players that they need to play at a reasonable pace, and educating our judges about when to identify that and when to intervene in a game to point out to the players they need to play at a faster rate.
Am I correct in saying that some of the more recent things that have been introduced are, for example, tracking slow play warnings and infractions throughout the course of a tournament? That I believe that happened several months ago before Worlds in Osaka. I think that was one of the biggest moves we've made recently.
Yeah, so we do keep an eye on the penalties that players accumulate over the course of their tournament. Most of the time, it's pretty irrelevant. People make mistakes. It's perfectly fine. That's why we have warnings in Flesh and Blood.
Mm-hmm.
But when players consistently play at a slow pace, after being warned multiple times, after being asked to correct their pace of play, then that is something that we can and we are willing to take action on. I feel like the community on the whole is generally very good with slow play. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like most players understand that we want to come to a completion of a game, that they do have enough time to be able to express their skill. And we are very conscious of how much time we allocate, especially to things like Classic Constructed, how much time we allocate to finishing a round to make sure that the players feel comfortable making those decisions, making sure that they're able to express their skill without having to take 30 seconds, a minute, or shorter, whatever, to express that. um but yeah, on the whole, it really just does come down to, if you're worried about slow play, if you're worried about your opponent slow playing, make a note of it to the player, voice your concern. If nothing changes, calling a judge and the judge making the intervention to, aid in your experience.
Given that you have a lot of irons in the fire at any given moment, I mean, you're handling the judge program, you're handling rules and policy constantly, new sets coming out, rules reprise, also, heck, even the translators for cards in different languages. How do you decide when an issue like this, like slow play infractions, deserves immediate attention? Is it a cue that you take from the community or otherwise?
It's something we discuss a lot in person at LSS. Um, our departments are very open with one another regarding, if there's a problem in one department, or if they see a problem, they contact the relevant department head or contact somebody in that department to voice their concerns. And we have a very high level of respect in LSS. And if someone in the development team or the design team, or even James White or Brian Gottlieb, feel like there needs to be a change in policy or a change in how we approach things philosophically, they come straight to me or come straight to our program manager, Klaus, and we can take on that feedback and we can address it then and there. And we can have these discussions internally about our strategies to basically approach these sorts of things, um, with all the relevant parties, of course, included. But it's all a matter of cooperation. I'm certainly not a juggernaut when it comes to taking on absolutely all the information that the judge community has to offer. But a lot of people in the judge community, a lot of people in LSS feel very comfortable approaching me or our judge program manager and voicing their concerns, and then we take that on and work out whether or not it's something that needs immediate attention, or if it's something that we can address in time with, like, the next update for the rules and policy, or the next update for a new set coming out.
As with any executive organization, at some point you have to police the police. I'm curious what levers exist for judge oversight. If a player, for example, wants to file a complaint in regards to a particular judge or a particular ruling made by a judge, how do they go about doing it, and how do you go about processing these complaints?
So, judge conduct, we have a specific group in the community, of volunteers who are very good at context. They're very experienced judges themselves. If there is a case of judge conduct or misconduct in a way, we do have a report form on our website where you can report that, or you can report it to a JCR, so a Judge Community Representative, or a JCRL, Judge Community Representative Lead, and they will be able to help you through the process. When a case of misconduct does occur, it goes through a committee. That committee gives a recommendation to our program manager, and then as part of the judge program, we make the decision about what should happen. Quite often, any case of judge misconduct also comes under player misconduct for certain cases, but often it very rarely comes down to that. In a lot of cases where players may be unhappy with judges, sometimes those just come down to misrulings or personal misgrievances that we obviously say that this is something that is a local issue. It's not something that we would decertify or question a judge's standing over, but we do occasionally have cases come through that we deal with, and it's all dealt with on a case-by-case basis, and we take it all very, very seriously based on the context and the information that we get provided.
The more I speak to you and the more I speak to anybody at LSS, it seems like that cooperation mindset that you keep mentioning is instilled in the philosophy and the basic work ethic of everybody there. And I mention this because this is far from your only interview or podcast appearance in the Flesh and Blood community. So I generally think that LSS is not only motivated to cooperate with one another within departments, but also directly with community and the people that are trying to disseminate information from you. And it makes me wonder that, I mean, you personally are very, you make it a point to associate with members of the community. So it makes me feel like you are incredibly proud of the work that you do at LSS.
Yeah, I'd say I'm proud of it. The comprehensive rules is my baby.
Is our public appearances part of your job description at LSS? Is it actually built into the way they look for people to hire? Is it part of your every day to day?
Honestly, no. The reason, regarding my public appearance specifically, it sort of almost started by accident where, I started engaging with the community, and my motivation is to make sure that the community is happy with the rules and policy of the game. I stick firmly to making sure that things are running smoothly in that particular department. And the way I get a lot of my feedback, the way I get a feel for how things are, is I try to engage with the community directly in addition to any other feedback that I get from secondary sources. And that sort of leads one thing to another, that I end up, being able to engage with, go out for dinners, I get invited on podcasts, I get to play games with a lot of, these professional players. And when I get the opportunity to make appearances or go on podcasts and whatnot, it's a great opportunity for me to not only talk about Flesh and Blood, which is what I love doing, but also engage with my job in a way that's not necessarily part of the job description. For me, I even in the Purple Discord, I engage with the card reveals channel because I love seeing the hype from new cards. I love seeing the previews come through. I love seeing people's reactions. But it also comes with the opportunity to be able to correct people on their rules and policy. If somebody says a card works this way, I can address that immediately and say, no, the card doesn't work this way. This is how it's going to work. This is changing, or this is how it rules because this is how it reads on the card. And honestly, it saves me so much of a headache to get ahead of the curve because, I could be fighting fires for days, if not weeks, if somebody makes a bad ruling when a card comes out.
In reality, you're just sitting there being the catcher in the rye, keeping people from running off that cliff.
Yeah, pretty much. So, engaging with the community is sort of part and part, part of my part of my work. I make it part of my work to be able to spread information about the judge program and the rules and policy and help communicate these things. But also for me, it's just a great way to engage with the community. Like I said, I love talking Flesh and Blood. I could talk Flesh and Blood all day, every day. It's just unfortunate that not everybody wants to talk about rules and policy all day, every day.
Well, we'll talk about it part of the day, and that's why you're here, Josh.
Yeah, part of the day.
And there's always more to talk about. It is important to mention because, with every rules reprised, so much gets added to the game. I mean, heck, we've even had a complete changeover in the way that the attack reaction step works because of the Gravy Bones Armory deck, right? All of a sudden, now there is an attack reaction window for allies.
Yep, that's absolutely right.
So even though we don't like talking about it, we are forced to, and that is where you come in, Josh.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it also comes down to that trust element. The company trusts me to basically head up a lot of that education and communication, and with my team. My team is expanding now. We've got 3 new amazing people on our team, Nick, Gwen, and Joe. And they're all part of the judge rules and policy department, essentially. And when things change and we need to be able to communicate that out, now I've got a team behind me to help disseminate that information and coordinate people and create the logistics necessary to make sure that things get ruled efficiently.
I have to ask, Josh, there's a lot under the umbrella of what you do, being the rules and policy manager. We've already gone over that. There's a laundry list of your responsibilities. I do wonder, however, is there a play testing contingent of your department? You're obviously not on the development side, so you're not playing 40 hours a week, but does it become important for you to sit down with other members of your department and play games of Flesh and Blood to, for lack of a better word, flesh out these rules?
Yeah, so I work remotely from the office, but I do go up during development. We play games with new cards being developed from the new set. I also try to make it a point to go to my weekly armory, although I have been not so great lately.
Shame.
To make sure that I'm still engaging with the rules of the game and what the meta is, and working out what questions commonly get asked at these armory events and whatnot. But when it comes to specifically when I'm doing things like proofing, for example, we don't often play test as much as theorize. The situations that we have to deal with in proofing, especially in me and Niccolo when we're proofing cards, because the situations come up so infrequently or they're so niche, there would be no reason to playtest because we would have to play more than the developers themselves for the situations to come up. So when it comes to this proofing, it's all very much theoretical. It's all very much trying to stretch the rules as thin as possible until they break. And then when they break, working out what needs to change.
Okay, follow-up question. Since you do playtest as part of your job occasionally, I wonder, who would win in a Team CC event? The 3 best devs or the 3 best judges?
3 best devs. Oh, wait, no, hold on. 3... Are we talking 3 best judges from the community?
Pick your poison.
Oh. All right, that's tough. Because there are a lot of pro players that are also certified judges.
Should we limit it to L2s, perhaps?
L2s, yeah. I think it would be given to the devs. There are some, don't get me wrong, there are some very strong L2 players, but I think the devs are just very, very good.
Okay, curveball. You have to be the middle seat for the judge contingent, and Brian Gottlieb has to be the middle seat for the dev contingent.
Oh, the devs would win every time.
I guess sorry. It's not so much
Brian's a way better player than I am.
Josh, excuse me. Actually, before I ask that question, I do wonder, you've mentioned proofing many times in other appearances and also during this interview. I wonder, though, if you could take a step back and define proofing and describe that whole process for the community at large.
Yeah, so I've talked a little bit about this before, but essentially the proofing is a thing we call pre-production proofing. That is basically, the developers have finished balancing the cards. They know what they want the cards to do, and how they interact and how they're played with. And there's a step in between the developer handoff and when we actually send these cards to the printers. The proofing aspect from my side of things involves a lot of making sure the cards do what they say they do, or say what the developers want them to do. And that involves, meetings, sometimes numerous meetings with the developers to go over the cards in the set. We usually do at least one big pass of every single card in the set, and we sit down, we talk about what this card is, what it does, what the edge cases are, what the intentions are, and working out in broad strokes what the syntax should be, whether or not there are small things that need to be corrected, or whether things need to be elaborated on. And we sort of refine that over time, and the pool of cards that needs to get proofed gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and eventually we end up with like some troublemaker cards that we just can't decide on the syntax for. Occasionally there's cards that are, almost a curveballs in a way, from all the way from design all the way through to proofing. Even to look back at the Hunted, Kiss of Death, Take Up the Mantle, and the Agents of Chaos. Those were the troublemakers of the Hunted set, and those
Your
were
favorites,
like
I know.
they were a pain through the entire proofing cycle, because there were just so many aspects to those cards that needed elaborating and shoring up. And the developers would be like, right, we want it to do this, this, and this. And then we would go through these, theoretical scenarios, and there'd be one that the developers haven't told us about. So we'd go back to the developers and be like, okay, what do you want to happen in this situation? These are the outcomes that we can rule in, or we can change the syntax to, or if you want a different outcome, we can change the rules. And, there's a lot of back and forth, and a lot of just like, ping-ponging cards between development and proofing until they get to their final stage to make sure that these minor interactions get shored up. And, sometimes cards, there are occasionally times where cards get changed entirely at the beginning of that proofing cycle because we identify a fundamental problem that the solutions don't really gel with, the theme of the set or the idea of that particular card, and they get swapped out for another idea. But throughout that entire cycle, the idea is just primarily making sure the cards say what the developers want them to do.
And how far ahead of release would you say that proofing generally happens? I'm sure it fluctuates here and there. But like, how many sets ahead are you working on?
I can't say how many sets ahead we're working on, but the proofing cycle, or like the proofing feedback cycle, can happen all the way from pre-design through to sending it to the printers, essentially. Like sometimes James will message me at 2 a.m. in the morning and, say, ask me if a certain card idea works. Or, I'll be in the office playtesting some cards with the developers, and, I'll talk with like Brian or Chris or something, and they'll be like, hey, I've got some questions about this card that might be in a set that might be printed, X number of months or years from now. How would this work? And then that can go all the way up until like just before we send it to the printer, where it's like, hang on. We just got to make sure that this interaction works this way. So it is a very involved process, and of course it is the most intense between when the developers hand off and when we start mocking up the cards for art. But it is a very, very long cycle.
So then, do you kind of think of the proofing process as something that is always going on, or does it have a very distinct season in the life of a set?
Honestly, it is always going on. There's so we don't work on like one set at a time per se.
Mhm.
Like if the developers are working on something, the designers are working on something else. I'm proofing something. The creative team's mocking up something. Like there's a long line of everybody working on all sorts of different projects because they all just keep coming through to make sure that we're all busy. I wouldn't say that there is. Oh, there might be occasionally there is a proofing season where the amount of cards that we have to review increases or like it's more intense. But I feel like we're always in a state where there are always questions to be asked or questions to be answered about where we want to go with certain cards.
All right, Josh, we've come to the end of Act 2, but before we close, you've been doing this job for about 4 years at this point. I'm curious, what are the most important things you've learned about yourself and about your role in the Flesh and Blood community at large?
Oh gosh, that's an interesting one. I think about myself, I feel like I feel like it's important just to continue to engage in the moment. Like
Mm.
I feel like when I was at university, I was sort of, adrift, just thinking about like what my future was going to be. I was planning to become a professor. I was working towards that. I was working very, very hard. And then COVID sort of swept that away. And then I sort of like fell into Christchurch and then picked up this job. And I for a while I was sort of thinking about like, okay, what is a rules and policy manager gonna do? Like once they've created the rule book, I guess I'm moving on from this, right? But as sort of time went on, I started to realize that I'm in a really great job and I'm in a really great position with my life, and I'm trying to make the most of it. I'm trying to enjoy myself every day. I'm trying to make time for myself and my wife and my dog, and try to engage with the community and enjoy Flesh and Blood for how I want to enjoy it, and just trying to take in the moments that we get given to us. And
Well,
for the community, I guess the thing that I've learnt the most is just how fucking lucky we are with the community. It's just
amen.
it's just absolutely incredible. And in no small part to like LSS and the philosophy that James White has ingrained in all of us, bringing people together in the flesh and blood through the common language of playing great games. But the community has just responded to that so, so well. Like everybody is so inviting, everybody is so accommodating, everybody's so understanding. Everybody just wants to be here to have fun, to play card games, to collect cards, to cosplay, to, create content. And, there is so much genuine love for the game and the community. I think we're so blessed to have the people that we have.
Without a doubt. Calling back to your personal self reflection, got to give you kudos for being open to what the universe has to offer, because that first moment where you engage with Jason and James, if you had your head down, it might have passed you by. So I think honestly, as I move through life, that is like one of the most important things I could possibly impart to another human being. So it's nice to see it exemplified here.
Thank you.
Okay, Act 3, which is going to be a personally tailored section for the guest. This one is called, well, it's got two titles, really. The first one is the short version, the second is the long version. The first one is James White is Unhinged. The second one is James White is Unhinged. Disclaimer, this is Joshua Scott's, a direct quote from Joshua Scott in reference to an idea that his boss had at 2 a.m. one night. But in James White is Unhinged, we will pitch Josh some card ideas that could perhaps come from a certain inspired game creator during a creative spell, and get his initial impressions on how to conform the rules of Wraith to making the card work. This will be that proofing process, live and in person, which is always going on. Okay, are you ready, Josh?
I am.
Number 1, this is my submission, and I'm calling it Too Much Octane. It is a mechanologist card that allows its owner to tutor out construct nitromechanoid from the deck and banish it in order to build the mechanoid for one turn. You must have all necessary materials in play, and then at the beginning of your next turn, after you've had the chance to attack with it and defend with it, it falls apart. And the way it's falling apart in Bryce Dev Head is everything goes back to the zone it belongs to, except for the hyperdrivers and anything that you banished from underneath it to swing with it. I see you grimacing. This is exactly what I wanted, Joshua.
Okay, so just to clarify, you want a card that takes Nitromechanoid out of your deck and banishes it.
Yep.
And then you want it to basically... Do you want it to immediately be constructed on the field?
Yes.
After that? Okay, so we could probably shortcut the banishing aspect of it, unless there's a specific reason that you would want to banish it and not construct it.
I don't want you to have a... I want it to spend a copy of Construct Nitromechanoid from the deck.
Okay, right. So you want to... Yeah, so you want to remove Construct Nitromechanoid from the deck. Do you need to have all of the stuff for Nitromechanoid in the field already?
Yes, you do.
Okay. So let me just get up Construct Nitromechanoid, and we can have a look at what the card actually says.
Are these the exact faces that you make whenever you're presented with these questions, by the way?
Yeah, pretty much. A lot of grimacing, a lot of like forehead sweat wiping. All right, construct a Nitromechanoid. It's a mechanologist action construct. Transform target mechanologist head, chest, arms, legs, weapon. 3 hyperdrivers you control into Nitromechanoid. I'm also noticing that we don't have an Oxford comma here in the true text, so I'll need to go fix that later. If you don't negate, yeah, this is also part of the proofing process. We look at old cards and we're like, oh my god, this needs to be updated in the true text on the card database. If you don't negate this, okay, and then go again. Okay, so the falling apart at the very beginning of the turn is pretty easy. So first we need a tutor construct. So we would need to go search your deck for construct a Nitromechanoid.
Ooh, is this the part of the game where we find out if it actually fits in a text box?
Yeah, I mean that's basically what we're trying to do. So we're gonna search your deck for construct Nitromechanoid. Before we move on to the next one, do you want this to be a condition? Do you want this to be a may effect, or do you want it to be mandatory? Search your deck for construct Nitromechanoid. The difference will be that you'll have to shuffle after this, regardless.
Mandatory.
Mandatory. Okay, search your deck for construct Nitromechanoid. What we could probably do is we could try to play it. Like, force the player to play it. So, search your deck for Construct Nitromechanoid and banish it. So, banish it, then shuffle. Okay, so we've got it out into the banish zone. The next thing would be play Construct Nitromechanoid. So play the Construct Nitromechanoid. So this would probably introduce a new effect called play that would force the player to play the card. It would essentially be equivalent to like the pitch effect that we've just introduced, and that forces the player to put the card into the pitch zone.
Okay.
This one here would be similar. It would force the player to play the card. And then we can discuss, or we would discuss whether or not you would be forced to play the costs, or whether or not you play it without paying the costs if you do it via the effect. And if the targets don't exist for that card, then the play effect fails, and then it would remain banished. Play the Construct Nitromechanoid, and then you want it to fall apart at the start of your next turn, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so then we go... do you want to destroy it, or do you want to banish it?
Probably banish it.
Okay. Banish it at the start of your next turn, and we want this card to have go again.
Yes, we do. I was toying around with making it a reaction, but that's not mechanologist.
Cool. So the syntax that we would tentatively go for would be search your deck for a construct nitro mechanoid, banish it, then shuffle. Play the construct nitro mechanoid. Banish it at the start of your next turn. Go again.
Sweet.
And that's it.
And so
and then
we would
just
have
by
to... banishing it at the beginning of the next turn, it kind of returns everything back to the proper zone.
Oh, that's right. We wanted to return everything back to the arena.
Because otherwise we just have a hero at that point.
Yeah, okay. We would need to... How would we return stuff? For each card... so let's make it a trigger. So we go at the beginning of your next turn. Equip... or return each... for each subcard, for each equipment under it, equip it. Each weapon or equipment under it, under it, equip them, equip it. Oh man, the syntax is getting really crazy now.
I want a lot of words.
Maybe for each subcard, for each card underneath it, equip or return that card to the arena, then banish the Nitro Mechanoid. It's still a bit hairy and would probably need to go through another review to make sure, but it would probably end up being search your deck for a Construct Nitro Mechanoid, banish it, then shuffle. Play the Construct Nitro Mechanoid. At the beginning of your next turn, for each card underneath the Nitro Mechanoid, equip or return that card to the arena. Then banish the Nitro Mechanoid. Go again. And looking at the character count, it would probably actually fit on a card.
Okay. Sweet. Look at us. We're designing Flesh and Blood right here and now. Okay. Follow-up question. Let's say that one of those pieces of equipment was a... Oh my gosh, I'm a caster and I'm drawing a blank. The Cogworks leg piece. The one that has a steam counter on it when you equip it. Let's say I used that ability before playing this card, and then it returns back to my leg slot. Does it get a steam counter back or no?
Yes, it would. So all of the cards that were equipped would then be put underneath... become new objects. So when they go from their current zone to underneath the card, they became a new object. And so when they get re-equipped, it's like you're equipping a brand new card. But it's interesting. This actually has a really weird interaction. So let's just take this for granted. Let's say that this was the card that the developers handed to me, and we're like, this is how we want this to work. There is a really interesting interaction with Hyper X3.
Okay.
Because you can put hyperdrivers underneath Hyper X3, right? Mm-hmm. So when the cards go under Construct Nitro Mechanoid, and then you're asked to equip each of the cards underneath it and return the rest to the arena, you would equip Hyper X3, and then all of the hyperdrivers that you put underneath Hyper X3 would be put into the arena, in addition to the 3 hyperdrivers that you put under Construct Nitro Mechanoid.
Oh my gosh, Joshua, are we not only making Max playable, but we're also making Hyper X3 playable? Come on, dude.
Yeah.
Brian, I'll take my check in the mail next week.
And then there's some other weird stuff with Evos, which I will probably not go into. It would probably change quite a significant part of this card, because if you tried to like put an Evo underneath Construct Nitro Mechanoid, you also put its subcards under there, and then you've got duplicate cards that could be equipped to your arm slot, essentially. So you would need to have a way to either indicate that the player gets to choose which of them gets to be equipped, or you equip one of them and the others go to the banish zone, or they get put underneath the equipped card. So there's some like really weird hashing out that you would have to do to like make this function in all cases. Um, and then there's also the question of what happens if you like. What else could you do with this? You could like, if you equip an opponent's card, like whether or not that goes under Nitro Mechanoid, and then how that gets returned to the arena under whose control that gets put under the arena. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of questions with this card that would need to be answered in like a longer dev session, essentially. But I think we've got the majority of the ideas down.
I think we need a smaller font size. What do you think?
I think that we don't want to go too small. I think if we reach it, usually if we reach a critical mass of text on a card, then we just revisit the effect entirely because we want players to be able to read.
Understandable. Oh gosh, that was a lot of fun. And we're only just getting started, Joshua. It's important for anybody that is not watching this on YouTube to know that as we have this discussion, Josh creeps ever lower into his webcam view as he grimaces and leans poring over the rules and syntax of these abominations that we're coming up with. Okay.
It's like engaging rules mode, essentially.
Yes,
I have to lean closer to the... Somehow, if I lean closer to my monitor, it will make more sense.
With every question, I'm gleaning how much you spend on chiropractors every month. Number 2. I'm calling this one Suna and Lola. A hero that is actually a duo of 2 distinct heroes. Parenthetical, they have their own life totals, weapons, text boxes, but the same shared deck and equipment. That fluctuates. The hero fluctuates between 2 modes, or the 2 heroes, throughout the game. An opponent of the duo must kill both of the duo in order to win the match. This submission comes from Patrick R. on the AGE Pro team. Josh is
all right, so a hero duo. So how does equipment work again?
Remind me how you want it to work. So the equipment is shared. The only thing that fluctuates is the hero text and the weapons.
Okay. So what we could do would be... So we have 2 heroes in play. Essentially, we need to have like 2 hero cards in play. Because like either of them can be targets and you target one or the other. And they need to be...
I don't think so. I think only one is going to be targetable at any one point, depending on which one is... So maybe it's a dual face card.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't need both of them out in the arena at the same time, you can just make it a double-faced card. But then you need to be able to track independent life totals, right? Yeah.
Yes, you do have to track independent life totals.
Okay. Tracking independent life totals is the tricky part, though. Man,
why is that? From a tournament standpoint, or just from a rule standpoint?
It's because it's not only that, because there's so many. So this is one of the things, right? Like when we have like a design of cards and whatnot, we have a certain number of like rules and what we call invariants. They're basically logical assumptions that we make about the game that allow us to build stuff on the rules. Having control of 2 heroes breaks that somewhat. And if you were going to introduce that into like a competitive format, then there'd need to be like a huge amount of review done on tournament rules and policy and the comprehensive rules to see what needs to be changed. The hero idea is interesting. I'm wondering whether or not it would be better to have them as 2 hero cards that you track independently, and then you have a way of determining which one is active or which one is your active hero.
Thus making them independently targetable, for example, by cards that say any target.
Either independently targetable or having a mechanic that allows like only one to be targetable at a time. So
Mm.
this would come down probably. This would be more of a design question than anything because, like, when it comes to proofing, for example, usually ideas are formed in the sense of how the card wants to be played. So, James will go away and actually play with these cards before he brings them to me, and like figure out like this is the idea
Mm.
that I want to be able to flesh out, and then I can propose ideas about how we could go about working with that, and then we can like work on the syntax. This is really interesting. I think if you were going to, I probably won't flesh this out entirely, but I'd say that there are two major ways that you could go about this. One would probably be like a counter-based approach. You have two heroes. You change the comprehensive rules. You introduce a new keyword that allows you to enter into the combat with two heroes, essentially. And that both of your heroes have to be removed for you to be able to lose the game, and that the life totals of each of those heroes are tracked independently. And then you would have a counter-based approach that basically indicates which hero is your active hero, which hero is targetable. And then you have a hero ability or some way of switching the counter on from one hero to
Mm.
another to make that hero targetable. You could also go with the dual-faced approach, but there would be like a far more segmented way to go about it. You could say one hero until that hero dies, and then you switch to the next hero. So it's sort of like you haven't seen my final form kind of
Okay, yeah,
hero.
yeah.
So you would say, okay, this hero is active, and it has 20 life. You get it down to 0, and then instead of dying, it flips over to its back face, and then you have that hero has 20 life total, and then you've got to get that down to 0 to basically win the game. Which would be, very interesting for things like mechanics that rely on comparison of heroes' life totals,
Mm-hmm.
which we've seen with things like Scar for Scar. I think there's merit to the idea, but like there are so many unanswered questions that it's too broad to narrow down into specific syntax at this stage.
All right, we'll move on from that then. Number 3. This one I'm calling Winthrop with, excuse me, wow, I can't even say it. Winthrop, Wisconsin. That's a play on Indiana Jones. Because this is a hero based around a side quest that, once accomplished, replaces the entirety of their deck with 15 cards outside the game and not included in inventory that are extremely powerful and not available for CC deck construction otherwise. The reason this is named after Indiana Jones is because the submitter, Moises Lopez, described it as a hero that is like trying to uncover cursed treasure and then is corrupted by it once he finally gets it. Josh isn't even looking at me anymore. He spun around in his chair, probably to say an expletive before returning back to the screen.
It's doable.
Okay. Let's start. I want to start. One of the most curious things that came up for me when I was thinking about this was, what are the rarity of those cards that don't exist in any other space?
It depends if the hero is to exist in a limited format or not.
Oh, crap.
If it has to exist,
Yes.
if it has to exist in a limited format, then the cards have to exist at basic rarity so that
Okay.
they're available for the player to be able to use at limited events. If it's not in a limited set, then they can just be whatever rarity. It doesn't matter. A rarity
But
is
then
just
you have
a
to collect
construct in the
them in order
mind.
to play the hero, which is kind of lame.
Yeah. It would be very similar to how the Agents of Chaos operate. Basically, we have a trait on the Agents of Chaos, and that indicates them as Agents of Chaos. And then essentially those 6 heroes, demi-heroes, belong to a set of Agents of Chaos. Because we rely on the assumption that you can roll a dice to become an Agent of Chaos, we can't actually add anything to that pool, otherwise things become weird. And we don't want to involve that as an issue for the time being. That being said, if you had a predetermined set of treasures that were all identified by some trait, and they were like, treasure of the Aetherweave or something like that, or like treasure beyond the dimensional gate or something like that, then you would be able to, predefine the set of 15 cards. You could, trying to think how you would stop them from being included in the deck during construction. You'd probably have to invent a new type, like treasure as a subtype, or maybe a keyword like hidden treasure. And the idea would be that you'd need some way, either a metastatic ability or a subtype to exclude them from your starting deck. So to exclude them from being included on a card pool or during deck construction. Then from there, it's a simple matter of just following through. Like if you've got all 15 cards that you need to be able to play the hero, and you've got the hero, then you activate its ability. Those cards that would replace your deck all need to be, and this is the logistics issue, they would all need to be sleeved alike so that they are not considered marked cards when they get shuffled and become your deck. And then, yeah, they would just become your deck. The questions, however, surrounding that hero, though, would be things like what happens to your weapon, what happens to your equipment, what happens to your cards in graveyard, your banish zone, your pitch zone. If you've got deck cards currently equipped or in the arena, what happens if those get shuffled into your deck? Is that okay? Does that mean that your treasures of the Aetherweave need to be sleeved like your deck? What happens if you're missing one of the treasures of Aetherweave and you need to like play the game? So there's lots of logistical concerns around those sorts of things, but on the whole, I think that is definitely an achievable idea.
Heck yeah, that's what I like to hear. Meaningless details, all to be worked out for other people. Bottom line, idea guy, got it right. Okay, last one, Joshua. Am I acting like a dev at LSS or no? I'm sure they're all close. A little. Okay, got him. Number 4, final one. This one I'm calling Reform the Old Ones because we've got a Mastery Pack Guardian coming out. And I think the flavor fits. This is another hero. Is a hero that is separated into 4 distinct pieces in the arena. So I guess Austin Summers, who submitted this, is thinking that you're going into battle without a hero technically. Once an objective is completed, they are assembled and flipped into a demi-hero hero. This is from Austin Summers, the board state magnate himself.
All right, so
Josh just had an aneurysm on screen.
All right, so you have what is it? You have 4 pieces that start in the arena.
And let's make them items so that you can steal them with meeps.
Oh god!
I'm just kidding. They don't have to be items.
What do? They flip and then they become a demi-hero? Is that right?
I think what he really wants is for them all to combine and then become Exodia hero. He said flip, right. But maybe flipping is not the most important part of that.
Okay, I think you would need to... I think you would need to still have a hero. You need to have something that's your hero. Because that's just how Flesh and Blood operates.
And otherwise, we got to go to 3.0, right?
Yeah, otherwise you go into 3.0, and I'm not looking forward to writing the CR for 3.0. I think that you would probably have a hero, and then that hero would have like 4 arena cards that basically start in the arena when he starts in play. Whether or not they are part of your deck list or not, it can be determined. Like... Again, you can either go down the Arachne route of having this sort of subset of cards that exist outside identified by their traits that can be pulled in, or you could have them as part of your deck list, and then there could be an interesting aspect to that too, in that you could have different types of cards that you could put into the arena. But somehow they would need to be put into the arena at the start of the game. That would either be part of your hero text, or that would be part of a keyword on the card itself. Then from there, meeting the condition, it'd probably be best to meet that condition on the hero card itself with some kind of maybe triggered static ability, like maybe a state-based trigger, so that when the state actually gets met, then it will trigger.
I'd need to look up the rules to make sure that that works with losing that hero ability, then meeting that state, and then gaining your hero ability again. I can't remember what happens with triggers in that particular circumstance. I think they still trigger, but I would have to confirm with the CR. Let's dive in here. Triggered effects. Let's go state-based trigger. Uh, if an effect is a state-based trigger, it must be met. Okay, so that would have to be something that. Oh, here we go. If a state-based trigger is generated while the game state meets the trigger condition, the effect will trigger. Yep, so that's fine. You can have a state-based trigger on the hero that when a given state is met, i.e., the condition is met, then you can go ahead and do the Exodia thing. And the Exodia thing would be like you control these 4 items, let's say, and then they would flip and then somehow meld together with your hero to create a demi-hero.
Yeah.
Additional rule that then explores meld the melding in the physical sense, not the keyword sense. Combining
don't get your lines crossed,
cards.
Joshua.
Yeah. You've got to be careful. Got to be specific when talking about these terms. So you would need to come up with a way to be able to describe mixing these cards together to create one big card, and then the big card can have its ability on it, essentially.
Oh my gosh, we get to have a different sized card too?
Well, I assume that's what he's imagining, is that like when you flip these 4 cards together, they're each a quarter of like a big card or something.
Say less, Joshua. This is perfect. It's like we're finally making a useful, like a not useful, but like a tactily playable, like full mosaic art card.
There are definitely ways to go about it. This is definitely an achievable thing. There are lots of like small issues, small questions that would need to be answered to make sure that this works, and that involves introducing or creating new keywords, new traits, creating a new mechanic with like melding cards together, and then of course like whether or not this is part of a limited set or not, what rarities these cards are, how often they need to occur, do they need to be inside the deck or outside the deck, etc.
Well, Josh, that concludes our Act 3, of course, which was aptly named James White is Unhinged. Do you think we got even more unhinged than the 2 a.m. texts, or is that about par for the course?
I think you have done a fantastic job at capturing the essence of what I deal with every set. So
I would have to agree.
Congratulate you.
That was really fun to watch. And not only that, during the last question, we also kind of got a sneak peek at how a judge like uses their open book in the middle of tournament proceedings. That was kind of cool as well.
Yes, I as if you're unsure. Even if you are sure, sometimes this pays to check your references.
Well, thank you for that real live demonstration of exactly what Joshua Scott does every day at LSS. Josh, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. It has been an unbelievable pleasure to be talking to you, and I would love to have you back. If the good folks in the world of Wraith would like to see more from you, where can they get their hands on you?
Well, I Purple Discord, although I'm not there very regularly. I do hang around in the Judge Discord as well, and you can find me on Blue Sky at jjscott.nz. Otherwise, just find me at events. I'm always happy to catch up in person if you manage to catch me. I'm always happy to talk flesh and blood, and I'm more than happy to talk rules and policy.
This has been another episode of Cardboard and Beyond. My name is Bryce Platz, your faithful host, of course, working with Arcane Games and Events on this show. If you want to know what is coming up next for us, you can always check us out on our YouTube channel, Arcane Games and Events. If you are watching on YouTube right now, then you're already there and you don't have far to go. What is coming up next, however, is another AGE Open Series that'll be happening on July 13th in both of our regions at the same time. LA will be streamed. New England will be happening in the shadows, but will be high-octane flesh and blood without a doubt. Until next time, folks, this has been Cardboard and Beyond, and my guest, of course, Joshua Scott. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.